going to read you a Christmas story. So my head's going to be down when I'm reading it. Later towards Christmas there was a heavy snow which raised the rows to the tops of the hedges. There were millions of tons of the lovely stuff, plastic, pure, all-purpose, which nobody owned, which one could carve or tunnel, eat or just throw. It covered the hills and cut off the villages, but nobody thought of rescue, for there was hay in the barns and flour in the kitchen, women baked bread and cattle were fed and sheltered. We'd been cut off before, after all. The week before Christmas, when snow seemed to lie thickest, was the moment for carol singing. When I think back to those nights, it is the crunch of snow and the lights of the lanterns on it. Carol singing in my village was a special tithe for the boys. The girls had little to do with it, like haymaking or blackberrying, stone clearing, or wishing people happy Easter. It was one of our seasonal perks. By instinct we knew just when to begin it. A day too soon and we should have been unwelcome. A day too late and we should have received lean looks from people whose bounty was already exhausted. When the true moment came, exactly balanced, we recognized it was ready. Soon as the wood had been stacked in the oven to dry for the morning fire, we put on our scarves and went through the street, calling loudly between our hands till the various boys who knew the signal ran out from their houses to join us. One by one they came stumbling over the snow, swinging their lanterns round their heads, shouting and coughing horribly. "Coming, carol barking, then!" We were the church choir, so no answer was necessary. For a year we had praised the Lord out of key, and as a reward for our service, on top of the outing, we now had the right to visit all the big houses, to sing carols and collect a tribute. To work them all in meant a 5-mile foot journey all over wild and generally snowed-up country. So the first thing we did was to plan our route, formality as the route never changed. All the same, we blew on our fingers and argued, and then we chose our leader. This was not binding, for we all fancied ourselves as the leader. And he who started the night in that position usually trailed home with a bloody nose. 8 of us set out that night. There was Sixpence the tanner, who had never sung in his life. He just mouthed in church. The brothers Horace and Boney, who were always fighting everybody and always getting the worst of it. Clergy Green, the preaching maniac. Walt the bully, and my 2 brothers. As we went down the lane, other boys from other villages were already about the hills, bawling, "Good King Wenceslas!" and shouting through keyholes, "Knock on the knocker, ring on the bell, give us a penny for singing so well." They weren't an approved charity, as were we, the choir, but competition was still in the air. Our first call, as usual, was the house of the squire, and we trooped nervously down his drive. For light, we had our candles in marmalade jars, suspended on loops of string, and they grew pale and gleamed in the towering snowdrifts that stood on each side of the drive. A blizzard was blowing, and we were well wrapped up with army puttees on our legs, woolen hats on our heads, and several scarves around our ears. As we approached the big house across its white silent lawns, we grew respectfully silent. The lake nearby was stiff and black, and the waterfall frozen and still. We arrived and arranged ourselves around the big front door, then knocked and announced the choir. A maid bore tidings of our arrival away into the echoing distance of the house, and while we waited, we cleared our throats noisily. Then she came. The door was left ajar for us, and we were bidden to begin. We brought no music. The carols were all inside our head. "Let's give 'em Wild Shepherds," said Jack. We began in confusion, plunging into a wreckage of keys and different words and tempo, but we gathered our strength, and he who sang the loudest carried the rest of us with him. The carol took shape, though not in sweetness. This huge stone house with its ivied walls was always a mystery. What were those gables, those rooms and attics, those narrow windows veiled by cedar trees? As we sang Wild Shepherds, we craned our necks, gaping in. The hall we had never entered, staring at the muskets and untenanted chairs, the great tapestries furred by dust, until suddenly on the stairs we saw the old squire himself standing and listening, with his head tilted on one side. He didn't move until we finished, then slowly he tottered towards us, dropping 2 coins in our box with a trembling hand, stretched his name in the book we carried, gave us a long look with his moist blind eyes, and then turned away in silence. As though released from a spell, we took a few sedate steps, then broke into a run for the gate. We didn't stop till we were out of the grounds, impatient at last to discover the extent of his bounty. We squatted by the cowsheds, held up our lanterns over the book, and saw that he had written 2 shillings. This was a good start, quite a good start. No one of any worth in the district would dare to give us less than the squire. So with money in the box, we pushed on up the valley, pouring scorn on each other's performance, confident now that we began to consider our quality, and whether one carol was not better suited to us than another. Horace, Walt said, shouldn't sing at all. His voice was beginning to break. Horace disputed this, and there was a brief token battle, and they fought as they walked, kicking up divots of snow. Then they forgot it, and Horace still sang. Steadily we walked through the length of the valley, going from house to house, visiting the lesser and greater gentry, the farmers, the doctors, the merchants, the majors, the exalted persons. It was freezing hard and blowing too, yet not for a moment did we feel cold. The snow blew into our faces and into our eyes and mouths, soaked through our puttees and into our boots, and dripped from our woolen caps, and we did not care. The collecting box grew heavier, and the list of names in the book longer and more extravagant, each trying to outdo the other. Mile after mile we went, fighting against the wind and the falling snowdrifts, nabbing congregating by the lights of the houses, yet we never saw our audience. We called at the house after house. We sang in courtyards and porches, outside windows, or in the damp gloom, or in hallways. We heard voices from hidden rooms. We smelt rich clothes and strange hot food. We saw maids bearing dishes and carrying away coffee cups. We received nuts and cakes and figs, preserved ginger, cough drops, and money. But we never once saw our patrons. We sang, as it were, at the castle walls, and apart from the squire, who had shown himself to prove that he was still alive, we never expected it otherwise. As the night drew on, there was a trouble. Boney, Noel, for instance, had a rousing harmony which Boney persisted in singing, and singing it flat. The others forbade him to sing at all, and Boney said he would fight us. Picking himself up, he agreed that he was right. Then he disappeared altogether, just turned away and walked into the snow, and wouldn't answer when we called after him. Much later, as we reached a far point up the valley, somebody said, "Listen!" and we stopped to listen. And far away, across the fields, from a distant village, came the sound of a frail boy singing Noel, and singing it flat. It was Boney. He'd branched out on himself. We approached our last house, high on the hill, the place of Joseph the farmer. For him we had chosen a special carol, which was about the other Joseph. So that we always felt singing it added a spicy cheek to the night. The last stretch of country to reach his farm was perhaps the most difficult of all. In these rough bare lanes open to all winds, sheep were buried and wagons lost. Huddled together we tramped in one another's footsteps. Powder snow blew into our screwed-up faces, and candles burnt low. Some blew out altogether, and we talked loudly in the gale. Crossing at last the frozen mill-stream, whose wheel in the summer still turned, a barren mechanism, we climbed up to Joseph's farm. Sheltered by trees, warm on its bed of snow, it seemed always to be like this. Always it was late. Always this was our final call. The snow had a fine crust upon it, and the old trees, they sparkle like tinsel. We groped ourselves around the farmhouse porch. The sky cleared, and broad streams of stars ran down over the valley, away to Wales. On Slad's white slopes, seen through the black sticks of its wood, some red lamps still burned in the windows. Everything was quiet. Everything there was faint, cracked silence of the winter night. We started singing. We were all moved by the woods and the sudden trueness of our voices. Pure and clear and breathless we sang. As Joseph walking, an angel heard sing, this night shall be the birth time of Christ the heavenly King. He neither shall be born at or housed nor in hall, nor in a place of paradise, but in an oxen stall. And 2,000 Christmases became real to us. The houses, the halls, the place of paradise had all been visited. The stars bright to guide the kings through the snow. Across the farmyard we had heard the beasts in their stalls. We were given roast apples and hot mince pies, and in our nostrils spices like myrrh, and in our wooden box as we headed back to our village were gifts of gold.